One time, I asked my daughter, "Is there anything you need help with?" She paused for a few seconds, then gently replied, "It's okay, Mom. You should rest." It sounded like a normal answer, but for some reason, my heart tightened a little. I suddenly felt like I was standing on the sidelines. Not because she didn't love me, but because there was a quiet distance growing between us, subtle but undeniably there. I started thinking back to our past conversations. Maybe I had said things I thought were caring, were right, were just part of my usual way of speaking. But with younger people, or even with those closest to us, sometimes the words we say with good intentions can quietly hurt them. They just don't always tell us. And I didn't realize it until they started talking less or smiling just to be polite, then quietly walking away. In this video, I want to look with you at 7 phrases many of us older adults say all the time. Not to criticize, but to understand why sometimes the people we love begin to drift away. Perhaps by uncovering the deeper meanings behind these seemingly harmless words, we can repair what has quietly come undone, without anyone noticing. Stay with me until the end of the video, because sometimes, just changing a few small phrases can help preserve the most important connection in your life. Now, let's dive in. Saying number 1, "Oh, I'm old, no one listens to me." I still remember clearly the day the whole family sat down to discuss remodeling the kitchen. Everyone was talking about everything: what color the countertop should be, how high to install the shelves, where to place the dishwasher for convenience. I was sitting at the corner of the table, listening quietly. Then I offered a thought. "Don't make the counters too high. One day you'll be older too, and standing for long periods might hurt your back." The table fell silent for a few seconds. Then my son-in-law gave a polite smile and said, "Sure, I'll think about it." But no one followed up, and the conversation quickly shifted back to which cabinet styles they had seen online. I stayed quiet. Later that night, my daughter asked me, "What do you think, Mom? Is the kitchen layout okay?" I smiled and replied, almost out of habit, "It's fine. I'm old now. No one listens to me anyway." It seemed like a light comment, but in truth, it weighed the heaviest on me. That phrase is like a ticket to quietly step away. You don't blame anyone, you just blame age, and slowly withdraw from the conversation. But that very sentence creates a real distance. You remove yourself, and others eventually get used to not inviting you back in. I didn't notice it at first, but a few weeks later, I started to realize that even in small matters, my children were asking for my opinion less and less. Not because they didn't care, but because they thought I had chosen silence. And sometimes that silence is what makes older people feel the most alone, even while living among loved ones. I began to change that with one small action. When everyone sat down to talk about getting a new dining table, I didn't wait to be asked. I simply said, "I've used this kind of chair before. It gets really uncomfortable after a while, especially for older folks like your dad and me." I didn't say it timidly or shy away from the topic. I spoke with clarity, not to force anyone to agree, but to show that my opinion still mattered. What surprised me was that this time, everyone paused and listened. My daughter even followed up with, "What kind do you think would work best?" That one question, as small as it was, felt like a door reopening, made possible just because I chose to hold on to my voice. If you've ever found yourself saying, "It's fine, I'm old, no one listens to me," I hope you won't say it too often, because each time we say that, we quietly shut down the connection our loved ones are still trying to keep. Sometimes all it takes is one confident comment, with a real example, to help others start listening again. Saying number 2, "I don't need anyone." I still remember the time I was in the hospital with a fever, right in the middle of a cold, rainy week. I was exhausted, couldn't eat, my head was buzzing. That day, my daughter called, her voice full of concern. "Mom, do you need me to come? I'm about to ask for leave and come stay with you for a bit." Her words warmed my heart, but somehow I blurted out, "I don't need anyone. I'm used to it." I didn't say that because I didn't want to see her. On the contrary, I longed for the feeling of having her sit beside me, pour me a glass of water, ask how I was doing. But I was afraid she'd leave work halfway through, afraid she'd see me as a burden, as someone too fragile. So I chose to decline, gently, thinking it was the right thing to do. But right after I said it, the other end of the line went quiet. Not for long, just a few seconds, but long enough for me to feel something shift. She kept talking, kept reminding me to rest, but inside, I felt a subtle ripple. It wasn't until weeks later that I began to truly see what that ripple meant. From that day on, she didn't ask again. She still called, still cared, but the question, "Do you need me?" didn't come up anymore. When I felt unwell, she simply said, "Rest well, Mom." That small distance, so slight, so quiet, was real. Looking back, I realized the phrase, "I don't need anyone," sounds strong, but it can make others feel unnecessary. Especially our children, who often just want to feel helpful, to be there when we need them. But if we keep saying we don't need them, over time, they might actually believe it. Later, when she came to visit, I tried something different. Instead of brushing her off, I said, "If you stay and eat with me, I think I'll enjoy the meal more." Just a small sentence, but my daughter smiled, put down her bag and said, "Then I'll cook for you." Sometimes the people we love don't need anything grand. They just need to know they still have a place in our lives. So if you've ever gotten used to saying, "I don't need anyone," maybe today is the day to replace it with something a little warmer. Saying number 3, whatever, as long as they are happy. It happened when my son was preparing to get married. The whole family was discussing where to hold the ceremony, how many guests to invite, whether to go with traditional customs or a modern style. I had a few thoughts in my heart, but when someone asked for my opinion, I just smiled, waved it off, and said, "Whatever they want, as long as they're happy." I said it lightly, not because I didn't have an opinion. In truth, I hoped everything would be more thoughtful. I wished for a bit of a family atmosphere, for there to be space for older folks like me, and for a few cultural touches that I've always cherished. But I was afraid that if I spoke up, they'd see me as nagging or old-fashioned. So I chose to stay quiet, to let them do what makes them comfortable. At first, I thought that was being generous, being understanding. But slowly, I realized I was pushing myself out of my own children's story, because when I said whatever, I was really saying I didn't want to be part of it. And when I said as long as they're happy, I was quietly deciding that my feelings and hopes no longer mattered. After the wedding, I felt strangely empty, not because of anything big, just a sense that I had stood outside of it all, like a guest who had been invited, not a part of the family being celebrated. And I had, in many ways, created that distance myself with a phrase that sounded noble, but quietly excluded me. I started changing that with something small. The other day, my daughter was planning a birthday party for my granddaughter and asked, "Mom, what kind of cake do you think we should get?" I almost replied like I always did, "Anything's fine, as long as the kids like it." But I paused. Then I said, "I think we should get a cake shaped like a cat. She really loves cats this year. What do you think?" My daughter smiled and said, "Then I'll order one just like you suggested." Just like that, I realized I could still be part of their joy without having to give up my own presence. So if you've ever found yourself saying, "Whatever, as long as they're happy," I understand. It comes from love. But please don't forget that your loved ones don't just want their own happiness. They want you to be a part of it too. Don't quietly withdraw, thinking that makes things easier. Because sometimes, the one thing that holds a family together is your quiet but genuine presence. Saying number 2, I don't need anyone. I still remember the time I was in the hospital with a fever, right in the middle of a cold, rainy week. I was exhausted, couldn't eat, my head was buzzing. That day, my daughter called, her voice full of concern. "Mom, do you need me to come? I'm about to ask for leave and come stay with you for a bit." Her words warmed my heart, but somehow I blurted out, "I don't need anyone. I'm used to it." I didn't say that because I didn't want to see her. On the contrary, I longed for the feeling of having her sit beside me, pour me a glass of water, ask how I was doing. But I was afraid she'd leave work halfway through, afraid she'd see me as a burden, as someone too fragile. So I chose to decline, gently, thinking it was the right thing to do. But right after I said it, the other end of the line went quiet. Not for long, just a few seconds, but long enough for me to feel something shift. She kept talking, kept reminding me to rest, but inside, I felt a subtle ripple. It wasn't until weeks later that I began to truly see what that ripple meant. And I didn't realize it until they started talking less or smiling just to be polite, then quietly walking away. In this video, I want to look with you at 7 phrases many of us older adults say all the time. Not to criticize, but to understand why sometimes the people we love begin to drift away. Perhaps by uncovering the deeper meanings behind these seemingly harmless words, we can repair what has quietly come undone, without anyone noticing. Stay with me until the end of the video, because sometimes, just changing a few small phrases can help preserve the most important connection in your life. Now, let's dive in. Number 5. You guys are busy. I don't dare call. Many times I've held the phone in my hand, wanting to call my child just to ask a simple question. "Are you tired today?" But then I'd put it down. That familiar voice in my head would whisper, "You're all busy. I shouldn't bother you." And so I didn't call. There was a day I had a mild fever and wanted to ask whether I should take the pill my daughter left for the morning or the evening, but I didn't call. I figured she was probably in a meeting. I remembered something she once said, not angrily, just offhandedly. "Mom, you call a lot. I'm busy and can't always pick up." It wasn't said to hurt me, but it stayed with me. After that, I told myself, unless it's urgent, just let it be. At first, I thought it was a sign of thoughtfulness, that I understood, that I didn't want to interrupt, that I respected her space. But gradually, I realized I wasn't just being thoughtful. I was choosing silence, and my daughter began to believe I didn't need anything anymore. The calls became less frequent. The check-ins, "How are you, Mom?" started to fade. Not because she stopped caring, but because I had unknowingly helped create that distance with a sentence I thought was kind. "I don't want to bother you." I came to understand that yes, our children are busy, but that doesn't mean they don't want to hear from us. It's just that when I kept turning down connection, eventually, they got used to no one calling. And maybe, on both sides, we were feeling lonely. Without ever saying it out loud, I began to shift things with one small change. One day, I texted her, "Nothing urgent, I just wanted to hear your voice for a bit. Call me when you have time." The message was short, gentle, without pressure. An hour later, she called. We didn't talk long, but it was enough to warm my heart. We often believe that young people need space, and that's true. But space doesn't have to mean distance. And sometimes, just a message, just a soft question, is enough to bring 2 generations a little closer. If you've ever said, "You're busy, I won't call," maybe try saying something different. Try, "When you have a moment, give me a call." Because in those small words lies a bridge, from our heart to theirs, one that might seem far, but is actually very close. Number 6. Only when I die will you realize what's missing. I've heard many older people say that sentence, and I myself once blurted it out, in a moment of anger with my son. That day, I asked him to come over and help me clean out the storage room, something I couldn't do alone because of the heavy boxes. He said, "Mom, I'll be free on the weekend. I'll come then." I was frustrated, thinking the weekend was still days away, and I needed help now. So I grumbled a few words, sighed and said, "Never mind. When I'm dead, That's when you'll miss me." It came out in anger, but it left behind a very real wound. My son went quiet. He stood up, said a quick goodbye, and left. That night, he didn't call like he usually did. The house felt quieter, and so did my heart. Later, I thought about what I had said. It might have sounded like frustration, but it was actually a form of emotional self-defense, a way of saying, "I feel forgotten." But when we use death as a reminder, when we use the idea of loss to ask for care, the sadness doesn't get understood. It only pushes the listener away. It hurts them. It makes them feel helpless. Over time, I began to see more clearly. My children love me, but they live at a different pace, with different responsibilities. And if I keep expressing my feelings through heavy words like that, eventually they'll hesitate to come close. Not because they don't care, but because every visit feels like a guilt trip, a shadow of grief. Another time, when my granddaughter cried over something small at school, I sat next to her, and instead of saying, "Why are you crying over that?" I said, "I used to get bad grades too." It hurt a lot. It's okay to feel sad. She looked up at me, said nothing, but held my hand a little tighter. And I knew, this time, I had said the right thing. We, the ones who've lived longer, often use our past as a yardstick to measure the pain of others. But everyone has their first heartbreak, their first disappointment, and it deserves to be heard, without needing to be compared or justified. If you've ever said, "Back in my day, I had it worse," maybe pause for a moment. Not because you were wrong, but because your loved one simply needs you to understand that they're hurting, not to be told whose hurt is bigger. And sometimes, silent understanding can heal more than any piece of advice ever could. Number 7. When you reach this age, no one needs you anymore. I don't remember exactly when I first said those words. I just remember they always came out during moments when I felt invisible. When the whole family was talking and no one asked for my opinion. When the kids made big decisions without needing me. Or even something as simple as a cold meal left on the table with no one remembering whether I had eaten or not. That sentence slipped out like a sigh. At this age, no one really needs me anymore. It sounded like acceptance, but deep down, it was a quiet call, hoping someone would disagree, would say, "That's not true. We still need you." But what I didn't expect was that the words didn't bring comfort or connection. They created distance. My children looked at me with guilt, then went silent. The grandkids looked confused, unsure how to respond. Relatives who came to visit grew awkward, not knowing whether to console me or quickly change the subject. I thought I was opening up, but in reality, I was making others feel helpless. Looking back, I realized that every time I said, "No one needs me anymore," I was reinforcing something that no one wanted to believe, not even myself. And if I said it often enough, my family might start believing it too. They would stop sharing, stop asking, not because they didn't care, but because they thought I had already stepped back from being part of things. I couldn't change that overnight. But I started with something very small. One day, while my daughter was busy cooking, I asked, "Do you want me to help prep the vegetables?" She looked surprised, then immediately handed me a bag of greens and smiled. "Yes, please, I'm boiling the chicken." That moment, so simple, made me feel seen again. Not just as someone waiting to be cared for, but as someone who could still contribute, someone who could still be needed. Since then, I've started saying things like, "If there's anything I can do, just let me know," or "I'd like to help out today too." These are light words, but they open a door to presence, to purpose, to being part of something bigger than myself. If you've ever found yourself saying, "No one needs me anymore," I invite you to think again, because your presence, your wisdom, your hands still matter more than you know. Don't withdraw. Don't erase yourself from the life of your family. Sometimes, all it takes is a small step out of silence, for everyone to remember that you're still here and still an essential part of their lives. As we grow older, it's not the wrinkles or the gray hair that scare us most. What truly aches is the feeling that no one's really listening anymore. The things I used to say, thinking they were harmless, thinking they were thoughtful, turned out to be tiny stones quietly filling the space between me and the people I love. No one meant to hurt anyone. But sometimes, it's our silence, our quiet self-sacrifice, our way of hiding sadness that makes it hard for the people who love us to find their way back to us. I'm not sharing this to blame myself or anyone else. I'm sharing it to slowly untangle a knot that's been sitting in my heart, so that if you, the one watching this, have ever found yourself saying those familiar phrases in quiet moments, you'll know you're not alone. We don't need to change everything to feel close again. Sometimes it just takes a pause before we say something out of habit, a bit more gentleness when we speak from the heart, and most importantly, to not be afraid of still being needed just because someone hasn't said it out loud in a while. If this message brings someone to mind, a loved one, a partner, maybe even yourself, hold on to this video. And if it feels meaningful, send it to someone you care about. It might be the first step toward reconnecting something that's gone quiet between you. And if you'd like to keep walking together through gentle, thoughtful stories like this, don't forget to click like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so that every time you open YouTube, something warm and human will be there, waiting for you. Thank you for staying until the very end. I hope that after this video, you'll speak one less sentence that creates distance, and one more that brings someone closer.